Have you ever had a day when the laughter of others is your worst fear? It might not have anything to do with you, but the phantom of perception whispers the sweet truth about how awful a person really is. You try to compensate holes in others' lives, all based on a delusion born from your own shortcomings. Or worse, your own pride. A belief that's so sweet, but little by little, the truth is revealed. You're not all you think you are, and the world knows it, even though they don't know who you are or even care. So how do we deal with the echoes of our phantoms, our passions? There's always a point when passion feels exhausted. It becomes a burden, draining the drug-like effect it once had. Your passion can become the very thing you hate amid doing something with it. You're not even capable of achieving it, even though you have the talent, are you? Even though most of Leonardo's work was incomplete. Do you think you can compare it to even a hair on his head? Who do you think he is, God? Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks overflowed with paradox. On one page, a sexy-ish sketch of a human figure, fluid, tender, emotionally charged. On the next, a mechanical diagram of gears, pulleys, or wings, precise, calculated, cold. On another, dissected bodies. His openness could be perceived not as casual curiosity, but as a glimpse into a disturbed mind. The unmasked face of a monster straight out of H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon. From one perspective, a genius. From another, a madman. How could he have 1,000 failures and still end up owning a little bit of inspiration in most, if not every, person alive today? You could see it this way. He drew what he longed for, dissected what he feared, and designed what he could not feel. But for all his mastery, Leonardo was a chronic abandoner. A life filled with half-finished worthlessness that would never help, protect, or progress anything, because he was wrong about what he believed to be right. He was blind to the reality of probability because of all the possibilities he saw in mind. Most of his work was stuck in a psychosis-induced daydream. He left commissions half-finished, paintings untouched for years, laughable anatomical studies without conclusion. The Mona Lisa took nearly 2 decades. No wonder her smile seems exhausted in the eyes of others, as if she's saying, "I'm doing this because I love you, not because I want to." The adoration of the Magi was never completed. To think, out of all the things he claimed to believe, he would at least try to finish the things he sought to create to promote God. The lack of completion could suggest he didn't believe in God at all. Maybe the only reason it was incomplete was because he was too caught up in his own self-belief as a creator. And if he saw himself as one of the greatest creators, then where did he actually find room for God in his heart? Or did he just use God because that was the trend of the day? Is he really that great? Or was he just another person who failed at what they set out to accomplish because of his choice to quit? His frescoes faded before they were sealed. He wasn't just slow, he was evasive. He preferred the blueprint to the brushstroke, the concept over the commitment. Was it laziness? Was it fragmentation? Was he a man who tried to fly through his longing, building wings from desire and crashing at the face of completion? Who does he remind you of? Can you even admit it? Leonardo's relationship with painting was ambivalent at best. His openness, personality trait that reflects a person's curiosity, imagination, and willingness to explore new ideas, emotions, and experiences, could be seen as an existential flaw. Though he declared that painting was a noble science, he often avoided it. He preferred to theorize about optics, anatomy, and proportion rather than apply pigment to canvas. He dissected corpses to understand muscle tension, but rarely used his ambition to finish a portrait. Although he has been immortalized as one of the most talented artists ever, he only finished fewer than 20 work, while Michelangelo finished nearly 150. Painting required closure. It demanded finality. Leonardo resisted that, or rather didn't have what it takes to get the job done. He was addicted to the symbolic ignition of beginning, not the emotional containment of completion. A lack of perseverance, or in other words, malfunctioning in the anterior cingulate cortex. His inventions are laughable compared to modern-day physics and engineering. Though they would look amazing in a dystopian movie, they were mostly non-functional. His work revealed he didn't know much about the nature of reality at all. His flying machines, war devices, and hydraulic systems seemed centuries ahead of their time. But the commission of that work might have set Italy back to the Gothic ages because of the lack of functionality. His openness to believe in himself seems to trump his actual ability of task completion. Much of his work was impractical, untested, and often physically impossible, even with the technological marvels of today. He was no superhero. His mechanical sketches were emotional metaphors. At best, wings for escape, gears for control, pulleys for lifting the weight of longing. A pretty doodle to look at. He wasn't inventing machines. He was externalizing his internal chaos into non-existent mechanics that would have surely destroyed his reputation in his day and distorted the immortality the world had given him. He could imagine the future but not inhabit the present. Today, Leonardo might have worked for Disney or MGM, taking 10 years to paint the nose stitch, or something like that. The movie would never have come out if he oversaw the animation. He would never have gained the same immortality post-death if alive today. He would possibly be some unknown artist, which isn't a bad thing if you contemplate it enough. Is it for the fame of the art of the work? Leonardo's social relationship mirrored his creative paradox. Apprentices adored him. Patrons misunderstood him. Lovers, real or rumored, entered and exited like shadows. He was emotionally magnetic but socially evasive. He craved connection but resisted containment. Remnants of a loveless childhood. He practiced intimacy through metaphor, not through sustained presence. It seemed he could draw tenderness but not live it. When Leonardo was invited to Milan as a court artist and engineer, he became a performer, a fool one might say. He designed theatrical sets that dazzled, military machines that threatened, and civic architecture that envisioned a better world. But with each new role, his identity fractured. He was artist, scientist, entertainer, and outcast, never fully contained, never fully claimed, and never fully committed. A dragonfly. The mirror multiplied. Did Leonardo become the mirror with too many faces, reflecting the face of brilliance? An example if the possibility of the Renaissance brain. Or was it a carnival funhouse, with mirrors of distorting identity? Leonardo's openness always seemed to deepen into obsession that never met their impulse. Interests that brought no true future implication to any scientific domain. He began anatomical studies with a reverence that bordered on spiritual inquiry as opposed to quantitative practicality. Consider the Vitruvian Man, a figure of perfect proportion, inscribed within a circle and square, embodying the balance between body and cosmos. The impulsive seeker solidified himself as the fool who measured the soul, an attempt to soothe the longing to understand the chaos of human nature. But he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. His life paints a picture of intellectual growth throughout his lifespan. As Leonardo matured, his openness began to shift from internal ignition to external transmission. He took on apprentices, Sali, Melzi, and others, young minds drawn to his brilliance, chaos, and quiet intensity. His notebooks, once overflowing with fragmented sketches and impulsive designs, began to change. The tone softened. The structure clarified. They became less chaotic and more instructional, modular guides for those who would inherit his symbolic language. Leonardo did not mentor through perfection. He mentored through emotional transparency and unfinished lines. He allowed his process to be visible, his doubts to be instructive, and his metaphors to be shared. He was the master who taught through incompletion, inviting others to finish what he began. His legacy was not the finished product, it was the invitation to begin. It seemed he mastered another talent, using his shortcomings to his advantage. An improvement. A perfect circle, a perfect square, a soul suspended between geometry and flesh. It is one of Leonardo's most famous images and his most haunting, not because it's complete, but because it tries to be. Its symmetry imposed on chaos. A man measured but not understood. Leonardo didn't just sketch a body, he tried to encode a soul. A task an atheist might find useless. The Vitruvian Man is a symbolic attempt to reconcile the spirit with the anatomical. A confession of his lack of understanding. The Vitruvian Man is not just a drawing. It is a question. What does it mean to be whole? Leonardo tried to answer with ratios and reach. We search for the answer through behavior, through the concept of social stimulation. He believed he could sketch the soul, but one could debate whether he ever settled into his own. He could design wings but resist flight. His notebooks were filled with brilliance, but his life was marked by fragmentation and mystery. His life was littered with inspiration that rarely saw completion. It was cognitive dissonance, the emotional tension between what we know and what we do, between what we long for and what we allow. Cognitive dissonance is not a flaw in the system. It is the system's ignition to emotional discomfort. It is the moment your internal architecture begins to shake, when beliefs, behaviors, and emotional truths contradicting lie collides. Hence the importance of determining your moral prior to further embarking on this journey. It is the ache of contradiction, the discomfort of misalignment, and the invitation to evolve. Leonardo's lifespan is a perfect example of dissonance. He revered painting but avoided it. He thought he mastered anatomy but abandoned research. He designed machines that could not function and relationships he could not sustain. He was not fighting his talent. He was fighting the emotional scaffolding required to ground it. If there is no true purpose to complete a commission, then why finish what would essentially be chicken scratch drawings for him? There was no fuel for the fire. Talent without fundamentals is theater without script. It dazzles with the longing for incompleteness. The unfinished work reflected the unfinished man. True self-growth begins but with friction. You must feel the split between your ideals and your actions. You must name the gap between your longing and your behavior. The deeper you bury it with dopamine-driven impulses, the harder it may be to find. I speak from experience. When you begin to dig it all up and confront it, especially if you do it all at once, it might be unbearable alone. That's why you shouldn't take a page from Leonardo's book, because it seems he couldn't keep a friend if tried, just a bunch of admirers. But admiration is a fleeting high. We are social creatures, and healing is found in each other as much as it is found in our choices. Cognitive dissonance is the emotional blueprint of transformation, the emotional signal that change is required. Feel the dissonance, name it, and build through it. But a clear set of moral establishments might help you bypass this self-induced trauma. If there is too much cognitive dissonance, when you begin to dig, you might find that there is nothing left inside. So, to be filled with the authentic love of another might be your only lifeline in such a situation where too much is unearthed. It's best to implement the mitigation strategy to cognitive dissonance, which is the combination of morals and mindfulness. You are a system of rituals, patterns, and neural activations. And the first step is not harmony, it is considering and accepting your contradictory behavior, which will never be an easy thing to do, but the truth will set you free. To make room for the change you seek, we must empty out the old so that we can begin anew. Triggers, habits, skills, and neural adaptation. Understanding our emotional reactions, especially those triggered by seemingly minor events, requires more than awareness. It demands deliberate reflection. Emotional triggers often stem from unresolved experiences stored in implicit memory. These reactions bypass rational thought and emerge as intense responses to present-day cues. But when we engage in honest retrospection, we activate higher-order thinking that allows us to reappraise these reactions with clarity. This isn't about reliving trauma, it's about recontextualizing it. By treating emotional responses as data rather than identity, we begin to separate past threat from present reality, label our emotions accurately, and reshape our internal narratives in a psychologically safe way. One common reaction to emotional discomfort is self-blame. After making a mistake, many people default to harsh self-criticism, often rooted in perfectionism and distorted attribution styles. This pattern doesn't just hurt emotionally, it impairs decision-making and increases vulnerability to mood disorders. Reframing self-blame means shifting from punishment to learning. It involves interpreting mistakes not as moral failures, but as developmental data points. Through cognitive reappraisal and self-compassionate mindfulness, shared humanity and kindness, we preserve self-efficacy, reduce shame, and create space for growth. Avoiding the repetition of mistakes requires more than good intentions. It calls for structured reflection and behavioral commitment. Effective learning happens when we revisit the mistake, identify the underlying bias or emotional impulse, and rehearse alternative responses. This metacognitive looping strengthens decision-making and reduces impulsivity. Strategies like implementation intentions. If X happens, I will do Y. Help encode corrective experiences into memory, turning errors into learning modules and reinforcing adaptive behavior. Habits, too, are more than routines. They are embedded patterns shaped by emotion, environment, and repetition. The brain automates behavior to conserve energy, but it retains actions that are emotionally congruent. Behaviors paired with safety, reward, or relief are more likely to stick, while those linked to stress or confusion often fade. Habit formation is not just about doing something repeatedly, it's about doing it in a way that feels emotionally aligned and sustainable. Psychologically, habits are reinforced through reward prediction. When a behavior consistently leads to a positive outcome, the brain anticipates that reward and strengthens the pathway. Over time, this leads to automation, where actions are triggered by context rather than conscious choice. This frees up mental resources, allowing us to focus on complex or novel tasks while routine behaviors run in the background. In this way, habits serve as a means of supporting higher-order thinking by reducing decision fatigue. But decision fatigue is a sign of neural pathway being developed in the brain. Social context plays a vital role in shaping habits. Feedback loops, like praise, mirroring, or shared rituals, embed behaviors in emotionally meaningful relationships. For trauma survivors, whose habits may be shaped by hypervigilance or avoidance, this relational dimension is especially important. Rebuilding habits requires not just repetition, but safety, symbolic reframing, and emotionally grounded connection. When habits are formed in trusted relationships, they become more than routines. They become anchors for healing and growth. From habit to skill to instinct. The idea that it takes 21 days to form a habit is a popular myth that oversimplifies a deeply complex process. Habit formation varies widely. Some behaviors may take just a few weeks to embed, while others require several months. Factors like emotional intensity, behavioral complexity, and individual neurotype all influence the timeline. But the most critical variable is consistency under emotional strain. Habits formed during moments of effort, discomfort, or vulnerability tend to embed more deeply, becoming more resilient and automatic over time. Habit consolidation is not just about repetition. It's about engaging the brain's emotional, cognitive, and physiological systems. Behaviors that produce relief, satisfaction, or safety are reinforced through reward prediction, while repeated practice strengthens neural efficiency. Sleep further stabilizes these patterns, allowing new habits to shift into long-term procedural memory. This means that habit formation is not mechanical, it's experiential. It depends on emotional relevance, symbolic meaning, and the conditions under which the behavior is repeated. Habits tied to emotional regulation or trauma recovery often take longer to form, especially when they challenge survival-based responses. In these cases, relational support and emotional packing are essential. Structured environments that offer safety, novelty, and symbolic resonance help transform effortful behaviors into default coping strategies. Resistance is part of the process. New activities may feel forced or uncomfortable at first, but with consistent exposure and meaningful reinforcement, the brain begins to adapt. What once required conscious effort becomes streamlined and less mentally taxing. This transition, from effort to automation, marks the shift from habit to skill. Skills are refined habits, behaviors that have been shaped through feedback, variation, and intentional modulation. While habits operate automatically, skills require flexibility, precision, and contextual awareness. They reflect a deeper level of integration, where routine actions evolve into dynamic capabilities. For example, a habit of daily movement may become a skill of embodied emotional regulation when paired with breathwork, interoceptive awareness, and symbolic intention. Skill development is relational. It depends on modeling, mirroring, and real-time correction. Social feedback accelerates refinement, helping individuals adjust, internalize, and transfer skills across contexts. A person who practices emotional labeling in therapy may eventually use that skill instinctively in daily life, demonstrating not just mastery, but transformation. Over time, refined skills can become instinctive. Instinct in this framework is not primitive, it's embodied wisdom that happens before the brain can process it linguistically. Even with skill, slight consideration is required. Instinct is the result of repeated, emotionally congruent practice that has been internalized so deeply it no longer requires conscious thought. This is the final stage of behavioral integration, when adaptive responses emerge automatically, aligned with both context and intention. In this way, the journey from habit to skill to instinct becomes a logical and tangible reality. It reflects the brain's capacity to evolve through experience and the human capacity to transform effort into embodiment. Unconscious patterning to integrated self. Human behavior exists on a spectrum, from fully conscious to deeply unconscious. At one end are deliberate actions shaped by attention, intention, and reflection. At the other are automatic responses driven by emotional residue, implicit memory, and conditioned survival strategies. These unconscious patterns often emerge from past experiences, trauma, or habitual emotional states, shaping behavior without our awareness or consent. Much of what we do operates beneath the surface. Emotional conditioning, relational imprinting, and automatic neural responses guide our choices long before conscious thought intervenes. In contrast, conscious behavior requires effort. It demands awareness, regulation, and the ability to pause and reflect. This distinction is critical in therapeutic work, where the goal is not simply to manage symptoms, but to reclaim agency over one's internal landscape. NSDT's social stimulation framework addresses this challenge by making unconscious patterns visible, interruptible, and transformable. Through structured activities like symbolic journaling, bilateral movement, and guided visualization, individuals can surface hidden emotional drivers and rewire them through intentional engagement, targeting the affected regions of your brain. An essential process for trauma recovery, identity formation, and emotional recalibration. It allows the nervous system to shift from reactive loops to adaptive coherence. This matrix supports this transformation by helping individuals distinguish between reflexive behaviors and those that require intentionality. By mapping activities to emotional states and developmental goals, the matrix guides users from automaticity to reflection, supporting greater behavioral insight, emotional literacy, and neural integration. Self-actualization, a concept popularized by psychologist Abraham Maslow in his hierarchy of needs, refers to the fulfillment of one's highest potential through personal growth, creativity, and self-awareness. Rooted in humanistic psychology, it emerged as a counterpoint to behaviorism and psychoanalysis, emphasizing the innate drive toward meaning, authenticity, and self-transcendent self-actualization. Within this framework is not a fixed destination but a dynamic process. It emerges when internal states and external expression come into alignment, when neural coherence, emotional clarity, and behavioral adaptability converge in consideration of our psychophysiological needs. This convergence reflects reduction of internal conflict, increased integration, and a sense of purpose that is both embodied and relational. It is not achieved through passive insight alone, but through structured engagement with activities that challenge identity, evoke symbolic meaning, and require emotional risk. In this light, self-actualization is not just a philosophical ideal. It is a neurobiological state marked by coherence, adaptability, and emotional depth. It involves the integration of cognitive skills, emotional regulation, and relational capacity. Social interaction plays a vital role in this process, as identity is shaped through feedback, mirroring, and shared meaning. Activities like storytelling, group reflection, and relational dialogue help individuals refine their sense of self while building resilience, insight, and agency. Each activity in the matrix is designed with precision. Whether it's narrative writing, movement-based practice, or expressive art, every intervention targets specific emotional and cognitive systems. These are not abstract exercises. They are functional gateways to healing and growth. Narrative work supports memory integration and identity coherence. Movement enhances regulation and embodiment. Emotional expression fosters processing, conflict resolution, and self-awareness. By aligning activities with emotional readiness and developmental needs, the matrix transforms therapeutic engagement into a neurologically informed process of becoming. It offers a path from unconscious patterning to integrated selfhood, where behavior is no longer dictated by the past, but shaped by purpose, presence, and possibility. Ecological considerations to cognitive growth. A person's ability to think clearly, solve problems, and make decisions is deeply influenced by their internal mood, but also external environment. For instance, someone navigating grief may struggle with focus and planning until emotional regulation is restored. In such cases, cognitive capacity is not absent, it's inaccessible. Human development unfolds within roles and environments that activate distinct emotional and cognitive systems. A student may rely on attention and executive function, while a caregiver needs emotional containment and relational attunement. These roles are not static, they are shaped by cultural norms, relational expectations, and sensory conditions. Effective intervention must account for this complexity, adapting activities to fit both the person and their lived reality. This ecological sensitivity is essential. A task that works well in a quiet clinical setting may falter in a chaotic home, not because the activity is flawed, but because the surrounding conditions disrupt emotional safety or cognitive focus. One must assess ecological fit, considering sensory load, relational safety, and cultural relevance, to ensure that interventions are not only theoretically sound but practically sustainable. Induction of cognitive dissonance within the incorrect ecological state may only further escalate the trauma. Mood, often treated as background noise, is in fact a gatekeeper. It determines how we perceive, engage, learn, and adapt. Emotional state directly influences attention, memory, and decision-making. Environments tend to pair their own emotional attachments, which is why relapse in various addictions, for example, sex addiction, can easily resurge if one drives past a brothel they once frequented without undergoing symbolic reconstruction, shifting the concept of a brothel from a place of fun into a place where emotionally devastated women and men go to sell their bodies for ends meet, or worse, to fuel their addictions. Consideration of such a thought, and the fact that you once participated, can be a hard cognitive dissonance to conceptualize, especially once the symbolic environmental construction has developed neural pathways into regions like the frontal lobe. Self-forgiveness activities form self-forgiveness habits, and self-forgiveness habits develop the skill of self-forgiveness. But consider, if one forgives themselves too quickly, i.e., instinctively, they might return to the brothel, having trained their neural pathways to essentially not care while in pursuit of caring. While it is theoretically possible for such reflexive self-forgiveness to mimic traits associated with antisocial behavior, such as reduced remorse or emotional detachment, this remains a speculative hypothesis, not a probable or clinically established outcome. This could nonetheless be perceived as a lack of remorse, emulating antisocial behaviors such as